it says it's referring to the day, it's meaning like you have to give some specific date, like first Monday of August or something like that. The broader view would be like, well, the Nelsonville City Charter doesn't have a date for a special election, but it mentions special election multiple times. That implies council can call a special election at any appropriate date. That's where we had left things. I've done some more research, kind of where my current thinking is. I'm highly skeptical that the broad interpretation will stick. And I don't think the Board of Elections is going to give us much wiggle room on that, based on my conversations with them. The reason for it, and I'll circulate kind of this in writing to the commission just for further review, and if we want to continue to revisit it, of course, happy to do that. But the applicable statute is ORC 3501.01. That's the Definitions Act for the elections laws. And it defines a special election as any election other than those elections defined in other divisions of the statute. A special election may be held only on the May or November dates, or the first Tuesday after the first Monday in August, or on the day authorized by a particular municipal or county charter for the holding of a primary election. I think two reasons why I think that pretty much mandates the narrow reading is it says day authorized in the context of talking about a series of specific dates in May, November, or Tuesday. There's a general principle of legal construction that when there's a general term in the context of a specific list, you interpret the general term specifically. The second reason is, well, it's saying that it's referring to the municipal charter with respect to the holding of a primary election, which seems to kind of box us into, well, you can call a special election, but it can only be at the May primary election, which technically the May charter ballot measure is technically a special elections. If you look at the Secretary of State's election calendar, it actually lists May 6th as the primary / special election date. In fact, the authorizing ordinance adopted by Council, Ordinance 0525, refers to the primary / special election in May. A primary election is really an election for picking the nominee of a partisan. Obviously, a ballot measure is not partisan. So technically, that's a special election ballot measure. I'll circle back to why this again, assuming this narrow construction applies, why that's concerning. I'll get to that when we talk about the December problem.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
The May doesn't, is that the 150-day thing too involved?
Yes.
And May doesn't allow that?
Right.
Okay.
Right, that's correct. And just to kind of fill everybody in, what you're referring to is the 150 deadline to get the wards done before the next applicable primary. And 150 days would have been December 7th, I believe, last year, which would have been a month after the November election, which isn't enough time to do the full public process for ward maps. If there aren't any other questions, I'm just gonna move on to the next.
That's for planning purposes, very helping.
Okay.
Narrow down ways we can go for sure.
Sure. I did today have some correspondence from officials in the both local and state League of Women Voters on their efforts to prepare their proposal. They have indicated they are very happy to accept the city's invitation to do that process. They are hopeful to not only assist the people, but actually use it as kind of an example of a local community coming together and getting this done. And just using that as kind of like a model for other other localities in the state. I think that's a terrific, um, idea. I think it certainly helps kind of spread out, good news for the city. I hate to say it, but, we've been kind of the source of a lot of unfortunate news over years, and it's nice to kind of be used as a good example and let people recognize that. I'm still waiting to hear back from them for an estimated timeline and plan of action. They still are, having some of those internal discussions. One thing I did make clear to them is, I don't even want it, obviously it's their process, it's their proposal, independent of the city. Obviously, I would expect a lot of, interaction with individuals of the city. I did specifically say, hey, just to avoid any appearance that the city's trying to do it, I can't be involved other than just helping them. Like if they need to use City Hall, I'm more than happy to facilitate that. But I can't be offering any suggestions or anything like that, just given my role.
And for clarification, us as commissioners obviously this commission's advisory in nature, we don't have a decision-making authority. Would there be guidance for us as members of this, participating in that as private citizens?
I don't think there's anything impermissible about you as private citizens, certainly. And in fact, the commission can probably provide input, because the league's map maker expert is used to dealing with state issues. He's not nailed into, like the details of Nelsonville. So I think he would appreciate,
Some local knowledge.
some like, hey, this is kind of some characteristics of the town, the history and the people that may not be, easily, known to someone who's not, from here. So I don't, it wouldn't be as long as it's clear that it's not the commission trying to dictate the proposal, but just kind of offering particular, points. I think that would be entirely appropriate. Obviously the end goal is so that the new statutory council come January 26th can then take the proposal. Yes.
Yeah.
And there's not time lost. So if we begin now, then that can be facilitated. So I'm, again, just continue to be very encouraged from, with the reports from the League of Women Voters. And again, I'm just very thankful, that they're willing to reach out and help. Any questions about that?
I do actually, just for the sake of public information, has the timeline on that come into any more focus for when
it will begin?
Yeah.
I'm waiting to hear back from them. I'm hopeful by April.
Great.
Because then that would give them, several months to get it, and then they could even have something kind of workable by the early summer.
Yeah.
It could be wonderful.
Absolutely.
Okay, so on the statutory versus charter forms of government, I'm still working on the chart. I do have this diagram that's kind of helpful. It includes some of the information. But this just focuses on the statutory form. If you look on the back, there's the symbol legend. But basically what it does is
Do you want to use my,
Did I do that?
oh, no, you're fine. I didn't want to trip you.
Well, I wasn't.
Basically, what it shows is the various offices that are in the statutory form, and then if you look at the table below, it actually refers to the specific statute authorizing and setting up that particular office, and it also indicates whether they're elected or whether they are appointed, and if they are appointed, then by whom. So, like for example, you can see the city law director, there's the sections referring to that. This is not comprehensive because, obviously the city law director under statutory city is elected, but if there's not anyone to run for the office, then there is that, provision for the temporary acting appointment. So obviously that's not included in this chart. The chart basically assumes the best case scenario. But I like this chart because it does, show the various, boards and commissions that would exist under the statutory form of government. There's obviously a lot of overlap with what we already have with the charter. But this, I guess the thing that I'm flagging right now is, there's been a lot of attention on the elected office holders for the transition. But there's a lot that needs to be paid attention to in terms of all the various commissions and boards, because those need to be filled as well. And the concern right now is just right now, the city's having difficulties filling those boards and commissions. We need to basically change the status quo. And unfortunately, status quo bias is a
You have someone who might be a good fit, but they say I need a hole in the head, right? Because of the kind of experience of our city government over the last couple of years.
Sure.
Well, and in looking at the mayor going down and the line of employees, before you get to the commissions, you would think about the salary lines would be equal. So we're looking at a lot more money outlay for all of these positions. Think it would be like having police chief, fire chief, and then 2 other positions at the same salary level. So,
And the directors of safety and service, that can be consolidated, that the code provides for that. But yeah, that's something I've been thinking about too, Terry, that is concerning.
Board of Control, what is?
So that's just, if you look at the bottom left hand of the table, that's the mayor and then the director of public safety and service. So if you combine that, it's just that.
So combining it into one position.
Yeah. Which is, by the way, that's how Athens does it, as well. And I believe it's how Nelsonville did it before adopting the charter, I believe. So anyway, I'll continue, putting together the comprehensive table with the active links to the, statute, but at least I like this one just because it's a little bit more visual.
It makes it very clear.
So any questions on that? Just real briefly for the review of the code of ordinances, I'm still needing to touch, but every time I talk to the auditor over the last couple of weeks, I keep forgetting to ask him to get the printed copies for each of the commissioners. And so I just need to actually remember to do, every time I call him, he's not available, and then next time we talk, I've forgotten about it on our long list.
Is that something you'd like for me to take up?
I just need to remember, it's just, my list continues to cycle, with him, and then, I'll be like, oh, I forgot about that, and then I'll call him, and he's not available, he'll call me back, and I'm in another meeting, and then contact, so, I'll just try to, follow up with him before the council meeting, just to get that. I can provide an electronic version if you would like. Of course, there is the electronic version already. I can give you also the link to the searchable one or as a PDF.
Well, I was talking with Terry and Moore before this, and it is kind of difficult to find an accurate, the real version of it sometimes. So if you could, just share a way to access it, that'd be great.
Okay, I can certainly do that. And then I guess discussing the December problem. Just want to again reiterate I'm indebted to Chairman Courtney for identifying this problem. Like, I had identified some issues kind of around it, but hadn't really put them all together until, Mr. Courtney pointed out the December problem. Although I guess, don't mind a moment of levity, I just appreciate you being the fear monger, so I'm not. But basically the December problem, as I articulated in my letter, refers to the fact that current elected office holders under the charter, their terms expire November 30th. That would be, just, if you look at the, printout from the Board of Elections, it shows 4 council seats expiring November 30th, 2025. Actually, that's not correct because Mr. Lawson's seat would also be up, so that's 5 seats. That are, one of which is already, vacant. The net effect of all of this is, unless there is provision made for December, there will only be 1 person on council on December 1st. The most straightforward way that I can think of addressing this problem is to have the commission recommend to council to pass a resolution in, directing the Board of Elections to make sure that they have, for just December of this year, on the November ballot.
Yeah, because as long as the charter is still in effect, it is at the time of the November elections.
Right.
Those seats do exist and need to be
Correct.
elected. I am very concerned about issues of confusion, you know, having.
Well, let me put it, I don't mean to pick on, any one person, but if someone is currently on council and their seats expire in November, and let's say they are running for a statutory office, their name's gonna show up twice on the ballot. Will there be some voters who will see them in only one, vote for them, and not realize that they're in both and think that they actually voted for the other race? I think that's a real risk. I mean, I've had discussion with, the city's insurance appointed counsel who is deeply concerned about this. I mean, their recommendation is basically, you know how council is supposed to do a bunch of year-end things in December, traditionally does a lot of year-end things. Their recommendation, which I think is correct, is all that needs to be pushed back to November, at least a month earlier. Well, here's the additional complication. The city treasurer is one of those office holders whose term expires. We will have a vacancy in the city auditor office come September. To my knowledge, we haven't yet been able to find someone who can be appointed to fill that from September to December. Hopefully we can. But there's a risk we won't have a council, a treasurer, and an auditor come December 1st.
You're speechless.
I don't really know how to say that. Given how confusing it would be to have 2 sets of races on the November ballot, I think it's.
And with that too, I'm worried about folks who might want to run for those 1-month terms or who are going to be looking at maybe running as an independent for statutory offices, you know, mistakenly filing the wrong paperwork, running for one office versus the other, and then you have very easily you have 2 people saying, I was elected to this office. You know, the Board of Elections would sort that out, but still with that confusion out there, that could cause significant problems.
I'll add something there, but I think Mr. Coons had a point.
Well, the other piece would be, you know, that end of the year business, I think moving it forward to November or whenever it needs to be done is great, but then the other problem, and Greg knows this, that there are always emergencies that come up in the last minute that you just can't anticipate. So the other side is we have to find a way to, and aside from the current people there in November after they get their business done, all resign and then appoint people for that month.
Right.
with nobody wanting to even sign up for these other elections, how can we be sure that anybody's even gonna wanna do it?
The one person remaining could resign as well, and then you're left with zero.
See, we're making it worse, but, so the problem is.
No, but it's true.
But no, that's exactly right. If the one person is just like, I'm done, resigns, let's say, so that there's nobody there's literally nothing that can be done. Like, you cannot force people to serve on council. A member of council has an absolute right to resign. You cannot force them not to resign. And so, I mean, like Mr. Coons was pointing out, what if, God forbid, in early December, a giant sinkhole opens up on Canal Street? If without a council,
Make the appropriation.
there's no council to make the appropriation, to authorize, signing the contract, there's no authority to enter into the purchase order. Like, realistically, the only solution is just to get a bunch of community members just to volunteer time and expense to fill it in. Like, yeah. But that's unconscionable. Like, that's the basic function of government. That's why you have a city government, is to do that. And it needs to be done, but if you don't have a government, how do you
So
do that?
the special election question then, if we can technically have an issue or special election item on the ballot, could there maybe be a authorizing the sitting members of council, if we have a court of council at that point, to appoint a temporary legislative body that, because I think that would be,
Sure.
for me, I just think that would make more sense than running all those 5 or 6
Sure.
offices, whatever it is, concurrently with statutory offices.
Well, maybe one way around it is saying, well, not having a government to spend the people's money on the people's business is just another type of fiscal emergency. Like, it's not like we're.
In fiscal emergency, but there's one that is absolutely coming,
Right.
yes.
Maybe that, now, the problem is that interpretation we'd have to get the Secretary of State, not just the local board of election, but the Secretary of State convinced on that. But maybe that's the angle to attack, is like, hey, this is a fiscal cliff that we see coming. And it doesn't appear that the law even contemplates this. What's the best, the closest best box that.
So we're asking them to give us a decision on that.
Well, it's more of us convincing them to go along with it and not put up the roadblocks to prevent it. Because the Secretary of State could issue a directive and say, no, you can't have it. And the point is, we got to convince the Secretary of State not to put up that roadblock, if that makes sense. But I think you're right, having something, rather than having 2 sets of essentially November ballots, having a sequence of it would be a little bit more understandable.
And is my understanding correct then that, that is a question, if we want to do like a transitional council to cover that
I think that.
end of the year, that has to go to the voters, under the charter of the city council cannot do that.
Correct.
And it's probably better doing that. I think that'd be more palpable to the voters in Nelsonville than saying we're going to extend the city council's term until the end of the year. I think that would be the easier thing, because it's not going to be seen as a power grab or anything like that. It's
Right.
going to be seen as these are going to be volunteer
It's just a set thing right there
appointments.
for that
We're
time.
going to appoint 7 or 9, whatever you want to be, individual people from the city to fill these critical roles.
I do have a thought on that. I think this is where the commission can help if this seems to be the path that is okay to take.
Mhm.
Then we need to get out and talk to the people about what's going on. We absolutely have to do that. And there's a person that's become available that knows most of the people that I think might be willing to help us with that.
But, yeah, let's come back to that. Let's
Right.
keep, I think that's it, that's a good idea, Joanne, I do.
We got to do something.
Yeah, I would value your input on the best way to do that and, interact with folks, so. And then here's something else I'm thinking about, for the elected offices, for the treasurer and for the, auditor. This also goes in with trying to conform the city government, the charter government, the statutory government, conforming those rules to what they do. In the statutory government, could maybe council, once those people are elected before their term ends, maybe appoint them as acting treasurer, effective December 1 to December 31? Is that, I mean, the charter, I don't know if the charter provides for that or not.
It provides the city manager authority.
Okay.
Yeah. So there is, well, obviously there's gonna need to be some sort of provision for the city treasurer and auditor for slightly different but overlapping periods of time. That issue there is just going to be finding, persons willing to do it, because again, you can't force someone to serve. That's.
Well, can you, the folks who are elected to those, I mean,
I mean, yeah, you certainly could. I guess here's,
Is anyone running for treasurer yet?
I don't know,
not that I'm
I'm
aware of now.
Yeah, but you've got a gap between when Taylor quits in September to November.
That is a problem, I think, but that's not a problem that I think is in our purview right now, as the city council will still have authority over trying to,
But they have to consider.
yeah, it has to be considered.
One thing to consider, for it too, the statutory form of government in part, so the statutory form of government, elections are in November, as we all know, but they don't take office until January 1st. Part of the reason for that is to give a 2-month period for whoever's elected. Let's say they're elected to I'll just use the auditor because that's a pretty intense position. Gives them 2 months to get training in. If they get appointed on December 1st, that really compacts their training, and obviously it's the state government that's kind of in control of putting together that. So that's going to be a logistical challenge. One thing that might make more sense, if we can get, a 4-month temporary auditor, is just have whoever's elected appointed deputy or one of the deputies for December, just to kind of get them actually eased into the transition more, so that they are actually learning how Nelsonville specifically does things, not while they're doing their training.
And for those officers, what department of the state is that training is
It
responsible
would
for
be
this?
the state auditor.
Okay.
I don't know what their schedule is. I could check with the city auditor, but that's just one thing to kind of practical thing to keep in mind.
That's probably something that I could find out too for the state auditor's office.
I guess it's an enormous challenge. In some respects, probably the December problem dwarfs any of the other ones in terms of its seriousness, and also just it's coming.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the other issues will require, as we all know, will require a substantial amount of work, but they're pretty straightforward. This one's a little bit more fun.
Absolutely. Anyone else have any, I mean, I think we can move from that into the commissioner updates and discussion, but, to stay on this. We'll do that, right, public comment. I think that the question is we should try to identify we have a list of problems that, or at least a partial list, because there's probably more that we're not seeing. Do we want to talk about possible solutions for that December problem then? I mean, if we can't, it's too late to put anything on the May ballot. But if we want to try to put that on the November ballot, that's playing it really close. But for me, I'm seeing that as the only way to move forward is either putting a charter amendment or, citizen initiated statute or ordinance to, give council, authority for that, to create that new legislative authority for 1 month. Chief Tolliver, I don't know if how you feel about the idea of trying to fill those, the treasurer, the auditor, or, John will be the law director at that point, until the end of the year. Trying to fill those roles, but
Yeah, it'll be hard.
Yeah.
Because, realistically, no one wants a 1 month temporary gig because a lot of work and requires, $100,000 bond and
There's a fairly significant risk that, just as city attorney, I'll be in the room all by myself, just kind of, I guess, clicking the court docket to see if the city's getting sued today, and, but nothing else that I can do, because again, just as city attorney, I can't just do things on, I have to do it.
you have to be directed by.
Correct.
Council. Yeah.
And if there's not a council, I can't get directions, on what to do, and I don't have, authority, on my own to do things. So that there's a considerable, I guess the other thing I'll say about summer problems, even for the office holders that do exist, there's a tremendous amount of risk because, one of the safeties for them is council provides oversight for them. And so either by giving them authority affirmatively to do something, or if they, make a mistake, council can, in providing oversight, can say, hey, this is what you need to do instead to correct this. Absent that, there's no oversight. Like, the officers and employees who will be remaining will be having to basically look over their shoulder at everything and double guessing everything. Like, if I go get a load of cold patch, will the state auditor come back at me in a year and say, oh, you got to pay for that load out of your own pocket because there wasn't a council to authorize you to do that? Now, if this May charter amendment is passed, it does solve the December problem. It doesn't solve the complete transition to the statutory form of government, but it does solve the December problem.
How does it not solve the complete? I thought that if the May ballot issue passes, that repeals issue 23, right?
Right, but there would still be the charter. The charter would be changed to what that ballot measure basically does is it keeps the charter, but changes the charter form of government to be the statutory form of government.
So that's that the legal gray areas go away, but then the issue still is how do we conform city government now to statutory government?
Right. I guess it is the way to interpret the voters' vote on issue 23 is we don't want just what's in, there are two boxes, box, charter box, statutory box. What if what's in the two boxes is identical? It can be the exact same thing, whatever's in the box, but did they go, well, I don't care what's in the box, I want this particular box. Mm-hmm. And so you can change it so that whatever's inside the box is exactly the same, for all practical purposes. But, did the voters actually go, well, I didn't want so much what's inside the box, I wanted to get rid of the chart, I wanted this box. So it actually makes it easier though to accomplish that because it puts in place, hey, we won't have last year's legal battles. If the voters want the particular box, it gives a quick pathway for them to get there. It just doesn't, it requires an additional step. But it does solve the December problem. It just doesn't quite get you all the way to, that box, if you will, even if, again, the innards of the box.
Okay. So I think we should just keep operating in the space that we're in and not worry about the outcome of the May election then. If there's nothing further on the December problem, I think what I'm gonna do is I will kind of consolidate my notes and from the minutes, what the issue is. Maybe I should try to write that up, and we could have a separate, I know we've talked about punch lists before, have a separate punch list looking at that, because I do believe that is probably the most pressing issue right now. Okay. We can move into commissioner updates and discussion. If there's anyone have anything they'd like to share, any ideas, things you've been thinking about working on.
Well, I was going to, with Laura, we were going to see what somebody who's done that ordinance codification or codification, whoever, whichever choice you choose, that's done it before, because we have no experience with that.
Yeah, it's serious legal work.
Yeah, it's very serious. And even if you separate things out, then it's all back to legal.
Mhm.
So we're just gonna get some information from somebody that's working on it with another city and see if that's, we're not thinking it's in our realm of expertise.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely.
Yeah.
It's also someone who was a former mayor, I believe, in Delaware.
For 25 years.
Yes, so has pretty substantial.
Excellent. Thank you both for doing that.
Well, that was the easy part.
Yeah. But I mean, it's good to know our limits and to seek wise counsel. That's.
Well, we need to, because otherwise we'll end up with a bigger mess than we've got.
Yeah. I will share that I was able to talk with Representative Ritter a couple weeks ago, and he said that he wants his office to be a resource for us. I've been in contact with his aide. We're going to submit a list of questions to the State Legislative Service Commission, who they don't give legal opinions, but they are the keepers of the code, of the Ohio Revised Code. And they will be able to say, I have 3 questions right now I'm going to send to them. Process for appointing officers when there's no candidate elected, because as far as I can tell in the code, when there's a vacancy, it goes back to the central committee of the party of the person who was elected. What about there's not a qualified law director to get a permanent person in that position? And I have also the process for setting the salaries for offices that are being elected for the first time, if the code provides for those things.
One thing, Mr. Chair, just to reiterate, it's given the switch to the statutory form of government, it's critically important that citizens of Nelsonville step up to serve on the Republican and Democratic Central Committees, given that those bodies would then be appointing vacancies. If the Nelsonville seats on those committees are vacant, there's not going to be local control over those appointments. So I think it's going to be very critical to make sure that those remain filled by Nelsonville residents.
Yeah. Your first question might need to try to address that these vacant seats weren't previously filled by you.
Yeah.
So there's not a commission to.
So, I mean, if you all have any questions like that, I mean, a sentence or two in scope, feel free to, send those to me, and I can include those in that.
Will we be discussing these before our next meeting so we can think further about it and see if we have more questions?
I mean, we can always keep sending more. I would like to at least get a first kind of salvo questions into them as soon as possible. It's a very busy time right now for the state government. It's going to be until until July when the budget's, the state operating budget is completed. So I don't expect to hear back from them very quickly just because of the crush of work they have right now. So I'd like to get things moving as quickly as
I
possible.
would like a copy of what your thoughts were, because sometimes that inspires us to think of what else
Yeah,
we might think of.
Yeah, when I send the initial email, I'll be sure to, I can make a PDF and share that with everybody.
Something that I shared briefly with the chair, when I was doing my search of ordinances last week, and I was using my best friend, ChatGPT. So I was entering links to all of the ordinances that we have, and I was asking for questions in my prompt, or the questions in the prompt was, what do we need to focus on? What are the most important ordinances or things to address? And what popped up, which I hadn't thought of, which we may or may not need to think about, or it may happen after this has all been settled, is our tax code and all of the tax ordinance around collection of property and income and all of that stuff. Another thing that came up was looking at service safety issues regarding emergencies and how the policies at play, you know, direct activation for things that are not like a police or fire emergency, but like something blows up, or you know, there's a water leak, or there's a flood, or all these things that were addressed. And then the final thing was looking at health and safety code, which I think here is really our code of issues of the code office and how that is implemented, and looking at are those going to be carry over, or are they going to have to be switched based on how that lives in the new government? So,
I like your choice of word lives.
yeah.
Really?
No, I think that the tax ordinance issue is a very important one. By the way, the charter is actually a little bit more pro-taxpayer friendly than the state code on the municipal income tax, to the extent that basically let's suppose the city income tax disappears today. And then let's say that there was an attempt to bring it back. Under the charter, any tax rate has to be submitted to the voters. Under the revised code, council could just unilaterally impose a 1% income tax without submitting it to the voters. Anything above 1% does have to be submitted to the voters. The current city income tax rate is 1.75%. So under either model, it would be something that would need to be proposed. I think the safest thing would be to resubmit probably to the voters in 2026, resubmit to the voters, and certainly no later than 2026, resubmit to the voters the question of the keeping in place the current income tax rate. The reason I think that that's critically important, taxes are kind of that one issue that get people riled up. And if there are some people who are willing to spend thousands of dollars to fight a $50 tax liability. And the problem there is, okay, suppose somebody gets a speeding ticket next year and goes, I'm not going to pay the speeding ticket. I'm going to go in court and say, the statutory form of government is illegal, so I don't have to pay the speeding ticket. That argument will likely lose. I'm almost certain it will lose in court. Because a judge is going to be just kind of very practically minded, going, wait a minute, buddy. You can't just violate the law free just because you didn't, you know, you didn't agree with.
Yeah, you made very good treaty Westphalia was
Right.
was not good because of this and that reason. Yeah.
An income tax, though, is a different challenge because it's not going. A judge is going to look at that a lot differently. He'll be like, well, part of my role is to protect the taxpayers from government taking away their hard-earned money unless the government follows the correct, strict rules for applying a tax. And there are good reasons why we have strict rules for how to properly apply a tax. That's different than a speeding ticket because a speeding ticket, the ultimate goal, the ultimate interest is protecting people, the safety and lives of people. an income tax is not the same thing. It's how does the government get its funding by taking,
It's punitive versus universal.
correct.
Yeah.
And so there's a bigger risk, like if there's not that reauthorizing vote for the income tax, that does open up that door. And maybe nobody would ever challenge it, but it's just knowing that taxes are that one issue that get people excitable, concerned is concerning. So I guess to your point, Mr. Prince, I think that's exactly right in terms of focus priority.
Well, hearing no further updates or discussion, we'll move into the public comment period. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to offer comment?
I have a comment concerning the December problem. Council the last few years and typically always passes the budget for the next year in December. And whether that's a full budget or at least a temporary 90-day budget. And so if there's nobody there, December or January 2nd falls on a Friday, will the employees be paid if there's no budget in place?
That spurs another question for you, Mr. Rowe. What effect if we do find a way to pass a budget and, December 90-day budget, how does that carry on with legal force into the statutory form of government?
I think the safest approach would be pass that budget this year, the emergency budget, and then one of the first things the new council does is just repass it again, just to make it.
Just reauthorize it?
Yeah, reauthorize it just to remove any question. That would be the safest thing. Now, of course, the new council could always change it, but it's just a temporary budget, so just adopt it and then they can adopt a permanent budget with different priorities because it's a different council.
What's the soonest you've ever come to passing that temporary budget before?
That I'm aware of is the first meeting in December. Now, obviously, we're gonna have a different auditor. The last 2 years, we've started the budget process in September. And we have the first draft, goes to finance, review, potential changes, second draft, and then council takes it and either passes it, which typically happens. But if we are gonna have a new auditor in September, or maybe no auditor, that creates some direction issues. That's gonna be difficult for a new auditor to step into the office and immediately go to work on a budget they probably really haven't dealt with. So I'm just bringing it up as a comment. So.
Would it be unrealistic to ask it to kind of have something ready in August?
August?
Yeah, something, I said something, I didn't say the final, but something that when the new one comes in, they could at least have somewhere to think about.
I think Taylor's absolutely interested in setting his successor up for success.
Yeah.
Good.
Although there's it'll be challenging, particularly because his plate, so he has to follow a whole regimen of state mandated transition things. So with him leaving office, he has to provide certification to the state that he's doing basically this transitional checklist. He has to provide a signed transition certificate. So he will already in August have additional
So
duties.
he's already started on it.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
okay.
that's good. It's just kind of keep in mind, he will have extra duties on his plate anyway.
I think it'd be helpful extra duties.
And maybe it's just an operational budget
Yeah.
and you get rid of every other expenditure for that time period.
Yeah, my main concern would be to ensure that the employees are paid on January 2nd, Friday.
Can ask.
So, Mr. Clement, with the idea of council being vacated essentially, at the end of December, or the end of November, in your experience, do you think that it would be, if the charter allowed for it, would it be plausible, for you to be able to fill a temporary legislative authority, you know, in the month? If the November election, there's you were authorized to set up a temporary legislative authority for that month. Is that lead time enough to be able to get a legislative authority into the city that could make emergency appropriations if necessary, could,
I will deflect that question to Mr. Rowe. Because, you know, I don't know that I would know the legal part of that.
about the possibility of council, if authorized, you know, by something the voters have said, yes, this is okay, to set up that temporary legislative authority to just act in an emergency, you know, an emergency capacity, if that sinkhole opens up, or if there's a incredible snow emergency and we need to, you know, we need to authorize extra overtime, whatever.
Right.
For,
think about that. I think there might be some ways to address it.
yeah,
It would be in the details.
yeah, I don't want to speak for the commission, but I think that is what is going to be, you know, the most plausible, the most workable thing is, if it comes down to it, we're not going to have legislative authority to seek authorization from the voters to have that temporary emergency acting appointed legislative authority. But we need to be very careful about, you know, we don't want them to be able to come in, a group of people to come in and do whatever they want as a non-elected
Well,
council.
here's an idea. I don't know if this would be plausible because none of us are running. What if this committee, if we need to step in for only emergency purposes in that 1 month gap, if council approves it?
There probably has to be not just council approval, but voters would have to approve it. Well, here's
Well, the problem is we don't want to have to go
Right.
through that whole
Yeah,
process.
we
We want to
have-
just be able to be very, only
Yeah.
for emergency purposes.
We have a group of people here who are working and volunteering for the
Right.
city now. Yeah.
one thought for the, maybe it's too half-baked right now, but.
Yeah, no, I want to.
Not your idea, the idea I had in my head.
Well, I think we're just all kind of
Yeah, and-
brainstorming it.
And I want to be very clear about that to, you know, folks in the room and folks who might be watching and reading in the papers later that, you know, we were just very much conceptually talking right now that this is a serious problem. And it's a novel problem that
There's no precedent.
that we need to create a solution for. So, you know, just getting ideas out there and vetting them as they come is, I think, what we need to do now.
And I guess another thought would be the current council could, if we get to that point, depending on what happens with the May election, that could be something they could recruit for, you know, that time period too, to do the appointment, you know, right after the election. So, you know, but again, we have to have enough people to say, I'm going to do that for 1 month or emergencies.
What would be the minimum that would be acceptable?
For that,
Mhm.
legislative authorities have 4 members under statute.
Okay,
That
so
probably
you
be-
wouldn't have to be a
Well-
full 7-member council.
Well, to take legislative action, it's a majority of members elected.
Correct.
and
That's correct.
Okay.
So.
That's what ORC says.
Yes.
Yeah.
So here's one thing, the ORC is a little bit, well, it was written by lawyers, for lawyers, at least the one thing that was, the charter was written by non-lawyers, so it's a little bit more, I actually, one thing that I like about the charter is like, it says a quorum is 4 members. I was like, hey, no math, I can handle this. As Mr. Courtney pointed out, the revised code likes to, we're not gonna say four, we're gonna say majority of the,
And you need to refer back to the
Right.
definitions act 16 times for one clause to
Right.
understand what it's saying. Yeah.
right, so now, one thing just to keep in mind, the four, whether under the charter or under statutory form of government, 4 members of council are needed to conduct legislative business, passing a resolution, passing an ordinance. But what if everybody but 3 have resigned? Those 3 still constitute a quorum to do the business of appointing a vacancy. So just keep that in mind. It gets complicated, and maybe I shouldn't, but I just like that.
No, yeah.
That's fine.
But for legislative business, you're going to have 4, regardless of the form of government.
Well, so I think that concludes public comment and moves us into action to be taken. Commissioner LaRue, I know that you had said something about earlier about how to get the word out and how to educate our fellow citizens.
I think we're gonna have to, because we have a hard time understanding it.
Yeah,
We're
and
gonna have any clue.
And I would, in my opinion, caution against jumping the gun on that, just because, like you said, it's confusing enough, us sitting here, we are devoting time and actually, and spending time outside of these meetings, thinking about these things and trying to even just wrap our mind around the problems. Citizens in Nelsonville who are, working a job, they have their family to take care of, they're running from that thing. We want to make it as easy for them to understand what is going on, and as clear for them as possible. So I think it's fine thinking about a strategy, to do those things.
But it's too early to
I think it's too early to actually start, making official statements of, here's where we are, here's a written report. And then we can, present that to folks at a town hall type meeting or something about statement of facts, statement of issues, and maybe at the point we have a roadmap going forward on some of those things. But,
Yeah, that's what we can tell them.
Mhm.
That,
Well, and the other thing would be, if we do have at some point where we're considering option A or option B, what we would like to make a decision on, we would want everyone to come here and give feedback and public comment too. So I think this is another great way for people to show up and give opinion here. Because we know, like with everything, the game of telephone continues on and on and on, because you say something and they thought they heard this, and then it becomes this, and then it becomes.
So, I think that we should make that statement. We make that statement here now that, we welcome public input. We invite, our community members and our neighbors here, to share their thoughts and to listen to this conversation. And I would ask that we all say that out loud. I ask that, our friends in the media, would make that clear. I think that we welcome public participation in this, and that we will make a point of, once we have an idea of what's going on, to actually formally present this to the community in whatever way we can. Other action to be taken. Does anybody have anything they would like to raise? Anything they would like to direct Mr. Rowe, Chief Tolliver, and myself to look into? Okay. Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
And second.
Second.
Without objection, we stand adjourned.